Welcome to episode 160 of The Hard Truth About B2B E-commerce. I'm your co-host Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm back with Tim on a little bit of a hiatus, but we're trying to catch up.
We're going to catch up. We're going to do 7 a week from now on, just to make sure that we're caught up, right? So, hey everyone. I'm just going to give a couple shout outs. I want to make sure that I mention who our listeners and viewers are. And one thing I mentioned before we started recording is that a number of folks have said that they've been watching us on video. So thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who's just listening to us on audio as well. I recently talked with Eric Martinez. I was on his podcast, and he is an avid follower, so I wanted to give him a shout out. He has a podcast called Digital Velocity. Also, Michael Brown, who's a tech guy out west. David Ledgerwood, who I believe is in Pennsylvania, and he is also an avid listener. Nikita Santos, Chiara Grassi, and a very old colleague of mine who's an executive at Adobe, Katie Cipollone. She and her team listen to the podcast. And so thank you to all of those folks, and continue to reach out. I'm always happy to hear from people. I just want to hear what you think. If you love me, if you love Isaiah, if you love our guests. If you don't love us, don't tell me. That's okay. I don't mind. So I'm going to pause now for a brief insert of our sponsor mentions, and then I'll throw it back to Isaiah to introduce our guest. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. I'm Isaiah. Please.
Yeah, I'm excited. We have a long overdue guest, Stephen Metz, who has been a pretty instrumental part of Zaelab and the Zaelab story for a long time now. I don't want to say the exact years because I don't remember Stephen, but I think it's been a while, and is now sitting in a new role, leading innovation for Zaelab. So thank you, Stephen Metz, for entertaining us and dealing with our lack of preparation and lack of structure. So yeah, could you give folks a little bit of background, just kind of tell people quickly who you are, please?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. So, name is Stephen Metz, and for the past 18 plus years, I've really been focused in the services space, specifically both B2B commerce, B2C commerce, and CPQ, along with some AI experience mixed in along the way. And yeah, as you mentioned, now at Zaelab, I'm really in charge with making sure we bring the best solutions and innovative intellectual property to the table for our customers to help them win.
So, Stephen, I have a question right off the bat. So, our listeners are from all levels. We have people who are like currently in college who listen, and people who are like CEOs. So, just say what CPQ is, or describe these things to our listeners the first time you say them, just to make sure everyone knows what it is.
Yeah, so I mean, when we think about CPQ, configure pricing quote, and it really is most frequently used for companies that are doing business with other companies, B2B, right? Quite frequently, the sales cycle is going to look something like a sales representative working with another business, and they may be a really complicated manufacturer of parts that need to have a high degree of specialty and engineering that are associated with them. It's not something that you can just go to Amazon, make a few point and click options and say, I'm ready to purchase that. You may have 30, 40 questions that you need to answer in order to make sure you're truly going to get the right product for the right problem that you're trying to solve ultimately. And those are the really complex problems that we're really good at being able to solve. And the way that we solve them is with software like CPQ solutions, where you can have a rules-driven, piece of software that drives the experience to make sure you get the right thing selected and priced.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
And you didn't start in this world. Do you mind just giving us a little background? And I don't know, did CPQ even exist in the way it did when you started? Probably, maybe in some rudimentary way compared to what it is now. But I'd just love to hear like the trajectory.
Yeah, definitely in some rudimentary ways. I actually started my career in the commercial printing industry, and that was my first project management gig, as it were. And we had built our own in-house e-commerce platform to kind of facilitate the process of somebody personalizing their print materials and then being able to order it, which was really great for the business because they were a corporation of multiple printing companies that ultimately needed to centralize the input of those types of materials. But I think it was kind of a natural evolution from real configuration in the e-commerce sense to the technology maturing to actually handle what a lot of people then and honestly still today manage through things like Excel worksheets or Big Chief tablets and a pencil in many cases too.
So this must have been like early B2B commerce then when you were there, right? I mean, we're talking, how long ago are we talking with this?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably back in 2006, 2007.
Oh, wow.
Bit of a baby phase, but I've been around for a little while at least.
Pre-Magento, Shopify, all that kind of stuff when you guys, so it kind of makes sense that it was homegrown at that point. Cool. And then obviously what gravitated you, so you were on the client side then, correct? Is that?
I was on the services side, the services technology side. So this particular company had, around 70 commercial printing facilities in the United States. Mm-hmm. And I was in the technology division of the corporate office and, helped manage the implementation and support of those, highly personalized commerce types of experiences. This was also the same business that, was responsible for managing all of Apple's commercial printing business. So, back in the early days when you had iPhoto and you're going and personalizing your calendar or your photo book and you hit the order button, that order actually came to us in our order management system that we had built. And, it was really amazing because it, not only was able to help manage the order and route it to the right manufacturing facility, but because all of that was digitally printed, it also helped facilitate the manufacturing process by automatically setting up the digital printing machines, bindery machinery, all that sort of thing from end to end.
Wow.
So I want to kind of go back and forth on a few different things, if you will. So I love the term innovation. I work on innovation projects all the time. I'm sort of that like later in career kind of guy who gets dragged in to say, what should we do? How do we refresh this business? And a lot of it has to do with, looking at innovation processes, right? Understanding what people have in place or don't have in place. And, could you kind of go through a little bit about what innovation is and how Zaelab approaches that through you? Or, I don't want to have too much secret sauce let out into the world so people don't copy Zaelab, right? But I want to make sure that people understand what it entails.
Yeah, so, when you look at a lot of other businesses like Zaelab, they are, admittedly, they're running project-based organizations where, there may be tight margins, tight billable utilization, targets, et cetera. And that's a tough business to run as it is alone, but it doesn't always offer up the ability to, dedicate time and manpower to thinking what are the trends that we're seeing in the market? What are we seeing from our customers in terms of challenges that they have that they may not even realize that they have? And, given our exposure to so many different technologies, how can we connect the dots to actually solve these types of problems that, the market is facing? And I give a lot of credit to our CEO, Evan Klein, because, he was able to kind of realize the value that we can bring by dedicating that time and effort in order to trying to solve those problems. So that's really, one of the reasons why my role exists. And, I'm really fortunate in the fact that I get like broad exposure to a lot of different clients, challenges that they have, to, really try to start to see some of the common things that are happening and how we can solve them. The other aspect of how we approach this at Zaelab is, when you speak to many businesses, particularly in the CPQ space, they are dealing with technologies that are incredibly rigid, very declarative in nature in many respects. So the first one or two questions that are going to come out of their mouth is probably going to be, tell me about your product catalog and tell me about your data. Those are all very important things to understand. But the way that we like to approach the projects first and foremost is, who are the actual users of this tool? What are their frustrations, their needs, their goals? And how do we try to actually understand that full business process and then bring technology to the table that's going to solve those problems that they have,
So
versus
really
letting the technology drive it?
internal and external stakeholders, is that the way you might put it, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you find that, because I am maybe a little biased here, but I believe pretty strongly that part of the problem with manufacturing and distribution is I think they're a little out of touch with what their customers actually want. And like, especially, a lot of the younger generation customers, but not even necessarily younger generation customers, even older customers want more autonomous self-serve or just better technology. And have you found that when you go through that process, there's like a disconnect from what they think their customers want and then what the customers actually want, which is like maybe some more modern self-serve mobile app, web app type thing?
Yeah, I think there is often a disconnect. Yeah, when you look at, many B2B businesses, you're dealing with folks that, have a wealth of experience in running the business process that they're accustomed to. They may have been working at, that particular company for 30, 40 years, but there is definitely a demographical shift that's occurring in the marketplace. The people that have been, supporting your B2B business for 30, 40 years may soon be reaching retirement, age, and there's knowledge that is really valuable in their heads. And where's that knowledge ultimately going to go in the future, right? I mean, you could try to bring people in, but, younger people these days don't always have the, the longevity of staying with a single business for 30, 40 years, like many people did, in past generations. And, the natural choice for trying to memorialize that expertise and that knowledge is technology. And that's also where CPQ comes into play, because you can begin to systematically, memorialize that expertise and that knowledge into an actual technology system that anybody could come along and pick up and use and meet their expectations.
One thing I've seen that's been an interesting innovation, lately, I'll just throw this out there, is I've worked with a few clients where, let's say, more experienced employees, 10-year, 15-year, however many years, they're recording sort of video interviews, really, with them, saying, well, how did you start in this business? Okay, how did you deal with that challenge? Okay, you got to this point with this client, how did you do this? And they're using that and transcribing, using AI to create different sorts of training tools for businesses. Have you seen anything like that with the folks you've been working with? This is very new, but I really like the idea.
I think it's a fantastic idea. We haven't really seen many businesses use that particular technique. There are other businesses out there, they, like to refer to themselves as digital adoption platforms, or DABs for short. And, those, I think, if I were to make a prediction, are going to continue to see some traction along the way, because you're going to need to make something that is very complex, which is often the case when you're talking about both B2B commerce, particularly manufacturing, and you need to make it really easy for people to be able to come in and pick up and use.
What are some of the, I guess, let's go two directions. Some of the big successes, but also failures along the way in that process. Let's just, one of the, say, actually, Tim coined this for us back in the Trellis days. We tried to kind of build around the idea of make commerce simple. That was our ethos, right? How do you make, and that's kind of a little bit what e-commerce is, right? And then you think about B2B and B2B commerce, it's like, it's very not simple, right? You have to sometimes call and figure out who to even get in touch with someone to get onboarded as a customer. The process from finding the vendor to getting the product could be I think we can all agree, it could be way too complicated, right? So at a high level, I'm just curious, what are, in your 18-year journey, what are some of the wins that have stood out to you in making things simpler? And then where are some of the failures where you're like, man, this is what not to do?
And if you want to blame anyone, feel free.
And then tell us all the bad vendors. No, I'm just kidding. All the bad technology.
So, I mean, if I were to point out just what I would say is one of the most common, I don't know if I would say mistake, but something I would highly encourage people to maybe think a little bit more about is taking an existing business process, which may have flaws, that are not optimal for the goal, and just trying to stick that into any new or existing piece of technology. That is where I see businesses really struggle with getting the value that they're trying to project out of an initiative come to realization, but also adoption. It becomes really difficult to try to adopt a new piece of technology if you've got a really clunky or not well-functioning business process overall. Where I do see businesses having a lot more success is having a point of view or a strategy, if you will, on how you incrementally get to where you think you're going. Because where you think you're going may not be anywhere near where you actually end up, because you learn things along the way, right? Mm. So we find that businesses have a lot of success when they just start with something small. In the case of B2B businesses, and maybe you're trying to get to a full self-service CPQ solution, maybe your first step is just trying to get something up and available to your prospects that allows them to discover more about your service or your product, and the options that are available to them within that, and drive lead gen based upon that, right? And after you've learned a lot there on what's working and what's not working, you can tweak that, and maybe the next step after that is more of a digital interaction when it comes to quoting. And then you start working way down more of a full self-service, type of capability. But if you just try to go all the way in the first phase of your project, you're probably not going to be as successful as I think you could be, as if you just took little steps along the way, learn from those things that are working and not working, and make adjustments based on feedback.
Well, what if you're way behind your competitors, though? Because that's, again, the type of thing that I come up against a lot in my projects, where somebody will call me in and say, we realized, we're 5 years behind, our closest competitor, or things of that sort. And those are real. They'll be like, wait a minute, we didn't do all these things, and look at them, they've caught up. Do you ever advocate that people take those leaps?
All you have to do is be Intel and just get a bunch of money from your competitors, and then that's the problem solved, right?
There
Isn't
you
that-
go. I like that. I like
Or you could just
Buyer-
acquire the competitor, right? I mean,
Yeah, or just acquire
option
them.
on the table too. No. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly an option. I suppose that everything can be a case by case situation. However, you know, I think there would have to be a lot of justifications for making such a big jump in a single project in order to try to get to the end state, because it's not just, hey, am I going to be able to compete with, the guy down the street, but you got to think about, how's this organizationally going to change my business internally? How is this actually really going to change the dynamic and relationships with my customers as well? A lot of change all at the same time can be challenging to manage.
You make a really interesting point, which is kind of like, honestly, it's making me think that like most companies go about this completely wrong, which is like they're basically, competitor, big competitor XYZ has this super amazing self-serve thing that maybe Stephen Metz helped them build over 10 years with millions of dollars or whatever. And they're like, we want that. And they have some small budget and they try and leapfrog 5, 10 years forward. And it kind of fails because, there wasn't that incremental, ability to get there. Right. And so, how do you talk people out of that? Because I think that's also part of the problem, is that some of these companies, they're so hell bent on this, like you said, Tim, like, oh, we got to catch up to the competitor. But then they actually get nowhere because they're not willing to make small incremental progress.
I think most of the time it just comes down to helping them realize that what you think you know today, there's probably quite a bit of truth to it, but it's about the journey and learning over time and making those adjustments is where you're really going to get the best product at the end of the day, both for your customer and for your own teams internally. And you don't get as much exposure to that feedback and that data by taking one big bite of the apple as opposed to doing it incrementally.
I think there's also another important point with how fast everything's moving. The big bite is risky in the sense that, a 2-year project, everything's changed and the whole premise is obsolete by the time you get there. So I think that's also becoming more and more of a problem with what you're saying with that approach too. So, it's really interesting because the more we talk about this podcast, a lot of times it's like, it's not really the technology that's the problem, right? How it's the processes, it's the people, and then, getting the technology to work in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, technology is the easy part.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying exactly that, Stephen. Technology is often the easy part. It is really having those conversations and getting people to again, you said realization. I love that term. There's a realization. It's the aha moment. I have the advantage of that a lot of other folks don't, where I'm constantly seeing people in different categories, and I'm going to see a lot of people I've worked with in the past, or people who are brand new, they're startups or they're bigger businesses, a lot of different things. But one thing they do have in common is that they often don't realize, something. Like, they don't know it. You have to make sure that they come to a realization, through conversation. I often inject a lot of humor into the process to make things go easier. That's just my nature. I try to do that, but it's really something where they're saying, well, wait a minute, why didn't we know that? Right? Like, or how, oh, thank you for telling us that, because or bringing us to that conclusion.
I have a funny story of a client, because you're making me think about a client where they probably did maybe even too much of a leapfrog project, but it did work and they're still a client and they're happy and we've had success. But, of course, the project that's that big of an upgrade, has painful moments, right? And I was in the room with the CEO and the CFO, and, I was explaining to him, some of the reasons why, there was some out of scope and out of, of course, with out of scope, more budget stuff. And he's like, the more you explain this, the more I'm realizing, like, we think it's easy, but it sounds like we're like trying to land on the moon. Like, he realized like what they were actually trying to do was so much harder than he had thought, right? and we were getting them there, right? But like no one had really, there's just a huge disconnect in terms of the executive level and what they were actually trying to accomplish. And it's just a funny story because like, he was a good CEO, and most CEOs aren't that. He was very nice about the whole situation, right? Because you can also be in situations with that where you could have like an angry CEO that makes things difficult. But do you ever feel like you're like doing? This is kind of a left field question, but do you ever feel like you're like literally doing like your job is actually like the technology therapist and not the because like you said, I mean, the more that I'm doing this, the more I'm like, I can solve these problems on the technology side in like minutes in my head. That's not the problem. It's like getting the people on board and the processes on board. And literally like I'm thinking in my head like it's almost like a therapy moment for some of these companies. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious like if you've how do you respond to that, I guess is my my
Yeah,
question.
I've had a lot of people come lay down on my couch,
It is like that.
to chat and yeah, to vent over
Do
time.
you play like smooth jazz in the background, or what do you?
I mean, I think you got to listen and empathize, a great degree. And, that's part of our approach is really just having a lot of empathy for the users and the businesses that actually need to make this thing work and get value out of what they're trying to do. And then the technology follows after that, ultimately. And, you know, as we look at the story that you're sharing about the CEO, it sounds like that was a pretty big initiative. And, I think it does kind of highlight the fact that when you do something really big right off the start, it can be tough to get buy-in at all different levels. But if you start just, small and say, hey, look, we're just going to fix these two things. Big process, but we're just going to fix these two things. You can really get everybody aligned around what those two things are, and you can celebrate that win pretty quick. And then start having the conversation of what's next.
And less therapy sessions,
Less therapy sessions.
So I want to talk about, and I really don't like this term, but people use it, productizing, right? There's always a tendency to productize things like CPQ, right? Right. Here's the answer, right, for this. You have all of these. So you do the therapy session, right, and then you're talking about how you have empathy. Use that word empathy. You're really trying to dig in there and understand what's necessary. But then there's a list of products that are available, to address it, or that are preferred to address it. What happens when those products don't really address it? Are you creating new products? Are you productizing again? Or I want to leave this open to you to kind of answer that, but I think it's a way that some companies, especially consulting practices and whatever, close doors. Because they say, well, these are our three products, right, that address it, and we don't have the other products, right? So how do you
Yeah.
address all of that?
Well, first and foremost, like we work with so many different technologies, and I think that is really a benefit to us because we can recommend what we feel is ultimately going to be the right solution for a customer. Sometimes that may be, a solution that has more customization associated with it. But, one of our core values is transparency, so we're always very upfront with our customers and try to let them know that and the alternative options which they could consider. Most of the time, it's their business process that may be driving them down a certain path of, customization, which, hey, if they just change these, four things, then, this is a much faster, less expensive path for you to pursue. But yeah, I mean, if there's a technology that we don't work with and maybe is not, strategically on, our radar, we don't have a problem recommending that to customers. It's ultimately what's going to be best for them overall. In terms of, productization, I wouldn't say that we go to customers and say, hey, it's got to be exactly this. It's always going to be more of an empathetic conversation. Who are your users? What's the process? What are we trying to solve? What are the outcomes that we're trying to get? And what's a creative solution that we can bring to the table to get you there? But that's not to say we don't, build our own IP to help us and our customers go faster. The reality is we see trends that may be repeating themselves over time, and we've begun building our own tooling internally to help us, accelerate those projects for our customers and also just deliver value to them where competitors can't.
So I want to ask an innovation question about, I used the word internal and external for stakeholders earlier, but I want to ask it specifically about you and your role. Like, how often are you thinking about innovation within the company as opposed to within innovation for clients, right? How does that kind of divide up your work day or your work week?
I would say it's a pretty even split, to be honest with you. I'm very focused on how we can both make the lives of our customers easier and better, but also my own colleagues. And with the advent of, AI and the productivity gains that can be realized if you just connect the dots and use it in the right way, is pretty phenomenal. And as we begun doing that more internally, we've been getting a lot of traction on people using these tools, and we're starting to see a lot of efficiency gains as a result.
I just want to mention one thing. It took 30 minutes into the podcast for us to say AI. How do you like that? That is amazing. That's a record, I think, in recent podcast
Well, the
episodes.
more and more I work with AI, though, the more I'm still convinced that if you don't have fundamental vision, processes, data,
Yep.
it's useless, right?
Yep.
You can prompt a bunch of things, but it's useless. I tested out a prompt on a thing, and it just completely got it wrong because it didn't understand some of the underlying data. And then I worked on it a little bit, and I got it to a better spot, but I had to feed it better data, right? And so I think that, I know we're going off topic a little bit, but my tangent here is that it kind of goes back to your point, Stephen, which is like, I think there's going to be a big mistake in the industry where all these manufacturers and distributors who are already kind of technology behind a lot of cases, right? They might be in old ERPs, old processes. It's not necessarily a good idea to leap forward and say, oh, we're now AI first when you have like fundamental core issues. Speaking of incremental improvements, like AI in some cases is like step 10. And if you can't do step 1, 2, 3, it's gonna fail. 'Cause
Isaiah, do you remember? Do you remember when we brought up the electric toothbrush or whatever, the powered toothbrush that said now with AI, right? It's like, why do I need AI for what? Like, what is going on with this? It says now with AI on the toothbrush.
microchip in my teeth to like send the data back to
I
the
don't know. I don't
so
know,
it
but
actually knows
I
what's
always
happening.
think of that when we get to this topic. It's like you can't just smack like a now with AI label
Yeah.
on something and then make sure that say it's all better.
Well, I
Yeah.
want to get a little bit more literal, Stephen, because we've gotten pretty abstract. But can you tell us a little bit about the modern trajectory of CPQ and how Logic plays into that, and now ServiceNow, and how that ties back to B2B? I think like it's still kind of nebulous for a lot of people,
Sure.
right? It's like B2B commerce, manufacturing. I think most people on this podcast, they think about like Magento and now Shopify. We started the podcast, it was like Magento, SAP Commerce, kind of your traditional commerce things, ERP. Frankly, we didn't talk a lot about CPQ, honestly. Thankfully, we had Matt on the podcast and now you. And then now you have this like, ServiceNow bot logic, and it's this whole like new world. And I think, frankly, we haven't explained it very well. And I'm hoping you can help us with that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, so ServiceNow acquiring Logic has been really exciting. And when you look at the history of ServiceNow, really kind of being focused on IT service, management, things of that nature, they've got such depth and complexity when it comes to workflows and integration patterns built into that core platform itself. And all of that, from a very pure technology perspective, lends itself to the complex structures that are necessary for both, CRM when you look at B2B businesses, but also B2B commerce and CPQ. So by ServiceNow acquiring Logic, they've basically just, I think, given themselves a massive shot in the arm, as it were, in terms of being able to go to market and, help businesses realize the value of pulling all these things together into a centralized platform from a service, support, front of the office perspective. And my own, selfish point of view is that as we proceed, there's kind of been this virtual wall, if you will, between the commerce guys and the CPQ guys, because they've traditionally been separate pieces of software.
Yeah.
And, quite declarative in nature. And I'm not a huge fan of that, because I think at the end of the day, you're trying to ultimately just facilitate the best possible experience to get an order. Sometimes that's going to be more of what we would consider a pure commerce experience. Other times you're going to have more complex scenarios that require like CPQ experiences. But with the technologies that Logic already have, and combining that with ServiceNow, I think you open up a lot of doors to unify these experiences together, where, no matter what you want to do, we can help facilitate the order for you in the best possible way.
Do you think that they need deeper integration into a Shopify, into a BigCommerce, into a Magento or SAP Commerce to solve that, or to improve, make that easier, the Logics and the ServiceNow, or both sides, right? If they're not integrated, then that's, I think, part of the problem, right? They're separate.
I think there's definitely an opportunity with ServiceNow to explore more in the commerce ecosystem. Fortunately, Logic already has some pre-built, plugins for Shopify, Magento that will help facilitate that for customers who want to use that. So that's kind of like an easy way in from a CPQ perspective into the ServiceNow ecosystem. But there's obviously a lot more that ServiceNow has available to customers that, I would say is not really being utilized by commerce platforms, or call it commerce more experiences that people are exposed to.
Could you explain that a bit more? Like what?
Yeah. So I mean, like imagine if you're you're a B2B manufacturer, you probably have some aspect of commerce. Maybe it's for spare parts. Maybe it's for something complicated that people need to actually configure. You may have multiple portals for transacting business from a commerce perspective, to warranty support, to documentation on what it is that you've got and how to service it. You may have a completely different experience for field service ultimately. And that is something that we routinely hear is quite frustrating for end users. I don't want to have to bookmark 8 different portals in order to do business with you. I want something that's simple. I want a single source of truth, and I want you to give it to me in a way that's really easy for me to consume.
Well, I want to jump on that just for 1 second, because that is also something that's very common that I come up against, where it's just all of these different experiences, these different ways of signing in. I can't have the same passcodes, or they're not sharing information across these different environments. It can be truly nightmarish from the customer perspective, the end user perspective, and it's not fair. So it's not fair to them, and it's not great for business. So it's those two things that are happening at the same time. And one final comment on this is that what often happens is you're dead ending. That's like something that, when you draw out the process maps and whatever, you get to a stop sign. And it's like, oh, in order to do this, you must go to, and then you get a link, or you get told you have to go somewhere else. It's like, I don't want a dead end. I don't want a dead end ever, when I'm engaged in some sort of business. It's just not the right answer.
Yep. And then what do? You pick up the phone and you call somebody. That becomes a very expensive interaction.
And then you get sent to a call center in another country, and
It's very expensive, and it's almost never going to work. I mean, I've seen the data on that. When people do these sorts of surveys, even if you're directed to a person who's wonderful, like would get customer service awards, you're so upset that you had to do it that it never worked out. So,
at that point they've already got like a 0 NPS, or I should know NPS better, but they've already failed the NPS score by the time they've gotten to the call. And then also that person probably has no power to fix the issue because they're like, oh yeah, that's in a different department, right? Because it lives in 10 different departments. And then, so Stephen, can you, getting really in the weeds here, how does ServiceNow actually solve this problem? So you're saying it can. Eight different portals, 8 different, and I just saw the commercial yesterday,
And
I might get in trouble for saying this, but I think there's all these big enterprise software. We're magic. We're at like, how does it? It's very nebulous. Once again, how does it actually solve this problem? Like, can you give me does it have a single sign-on Okta type thing? Is it an Okta competitor? Like, we do have CTOs listening to this conversation, so for some, we have some. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you look at a lot of software companies that may look something like ServiceNow. Many times they're out there acquiring businesses and, they may kind of give you a glimpse into that and maybe lightly integrate it into the core platform, but there's always kind of nuance. And sometimes that manifests through like really poor API performance or, the fact that the business may completely try to rewrite the piece of software that they just purchased into the core platform itself.
Wait, people over customize their software, Stephen? I thought that
that happens all the time, right? But what I'm seeing personally with ServiceNow is yes, it does integrate with all these different other types of pieces of software out there, but the core of ServiceNow itself is really built around like a workflow type of system and an API first approach to integration. So as they've continued to build out this platform, it still kind of revolves around that core idea itself, and it gives you one piece of software which can be used in many different ways, many different robust ways.
And the workflows, can those be a UI and this, like a non-technical user can log in and see those workflows, or how does that work?
Yeah, in many cases that's true. Obviously, we work with a lot of B2B manufacturers who have very complex requirements. So there's always like any software provider that comes in and tells you it's no code or low code only, like they're probably not being as upfront with you on the reality of an implementation as they should be. But there are definitely the majority of the aspects in configuring a system like ServiceNow, which are low code and no code, but there's always that like 10-20% where there's got to be some customization done.
I know I want to just keep going here because I think this is really important. When you are integrating with all these things with ServiceNow, because that's what I see a lot of pain. I mean, most of the pain I see is integrations, right? Because especially when you're dealing with old ERP systems, maybe they don't even. I've literally seen a lot that don't have APIs, right? Or the APIs just aren't. How does ServiceNow? How does it get into all of these? Because then my concern as an outsider is, well, now I still have to build all these integrations, right? So how does it help me alleviate that pain, I guess? What I'm trying to
it makes it open and available. When you look at a lot of ERP providers, as you mentioned, as an implementation partner, we integrate with a lot of different ERP systems, but is their documentation publicly available? A lot of times no, or it may not be up to date at all. ServiceNow is very open with their education materials, their integration layers, and the APIs that are available, and they've even begun adopting more modern approaches. Like for example, they have a zero copy integration with Snowflake. So if you've got a Snowflake instance and you've got your data there, you probably don't want to have to deal with constantly shuttling that information from one system to another just for the other system to work. Well, if you got zero copy integration with Snowflake, then that makes that a lot easier and go a lot faster.
So there's
many different ways to
So they've already got a lot of pre-built integrations into other top systems.
Yep.
Basically.
Yep. Exactly.
And then obviously, if you have old systems, you just you have to deal with it, I assume. But could you use it as a middleware, like? Or would you still have something like a MuleSoft or a Boomi, or could it actually replace that too? I'm just trying to get in the weeds here, but
I think the answer to that most likely depends. I would say scenarios which data is originating, within the platform of ServiceNow may not make a lot of sense to go through a middleware to get somewhere else because
Yeah.
ServiceNow has, things like flows and other things that you can do in order to manage that integration itself. But when you're looking at data which may need to go into the system itself, then I could certainly see some benefit on a translation layer in between. But there's a lot of nuance, I think, that ultimately
Yeah.
goes into a recommendation like that.
Okay. No, this is super interesting. So it's kind of like this more modern software from an architecture perspective that can help you modernize your workflows, integrate with everything, and bridge the gaps between all your systems and processes and customer experience. Is
Yeah.
that?
So who wouldn't need it? I
Who
love
wouldn't
asking
need
that
it?
kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's an important question.
Yeah.
Who do we not sell this to if we're
Yeah, who
talking?
wouldn't you sell it to? And
Yeah, I would say that if you've got just kind of a really small business, it may not be the best fit for you.
yeah,
When
Yeah.
you look at ServiceNow, it's truly enterprise grade software,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of abstractions of data that goes along with that. So, if you're a smaller business and that may not be the right scale for you.
How small? Let's just be specific because
yeah,
there's huge definitions of small, medium,
like under
large.
5 million revenue,
Like
or
yeah, like a 20-person company. Maybe let's do headcount. Might
yeah,
be a better way to think about it, just because usually
Yeah.
sure.
Maybe less than 100 people, if
less
I
than
were to
100
ballpark
people.
it.
That makes sense. A less than 100-person company may be able to work on some small business,
Yeah.
software, a couple, like a HubSpot or something like that. That's often what we see. When do you think they would grow into that? Let's say you're growing 100, 200, 300, 500, like now you start to see all these systems, things become, that's probably the growing pain that you might be solving, right? Is that
I think
right?
certainly as the business grows, and many times we see, our customers who have not just grown their business, organically, but they've been out acquiring other businesses.
Hmm.
And when you acquire other businesses, of course, you acquire their technical debt that goes along with that, and you have to find ways to kind of harmonize that together in a single way. Like if you're on that trajectory, then I think there's definitely a stronger case
It
for
sounds like a
enterprise scale
perfect
software.
software for the private equity roll-up strategy. Sounds like
Yeah, I could definitely see that, because I mean, look, when you're looking at the private equity strategy, a big part of it is can we become more efficient as a single unit. Not always, but I think that's quite often, a goal on a business play like that.
So how, and again, this is sort of an angle on this. I just want to throw out there really quickly. So, is there an upper limit to when, like, are there enterprise level businesses where they're just going to have to do their own thing and it won't make sense? Like, I mean, what? Again, it's kind of a range, right? I mean, so there's
Yeah.
a range of businesses that this would work in best.
Not that we've seen, to be honest with you. I mean, you look at a lot of the customer base of ServiceNow, and they've, historically, and this no secret, but they've really been able to meet the demands of telecom businesses. And we think of a
Sure.
telecom business that spans across an entire country. That's absolutely massive in so many different ways. So,
Okay. No, that's
Yeah,
good.
I think from what I've seen as a very, very cursory outsider, they've definitely super strong enterprise. It's probably a question of if you're really small, it could be overkill, for, a 20-person business.
yeah.
But I also find that most 20-person businesses, everything, it's like, honestly, most businesses up to 100 people, going back to that overcomplicating thing, most of the time they overcomplicate and they only need a couple like simple things to make it work.
So I want to give you, we're getting toward the end, pretty soon of our podcast. Want to make sure we give you an opportunity to
Yeah.
put, some things out there, anything that we may have missed, or just telling us maybe something that's coming up, to innovations on the pipeline, or anything you can tell us about.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been working on some innovations of our own that, we have been using as our own team on implementing projects, but also making available to our customers. We're calling it Logikit, but basically it's a set of tools, a toolbox. I build a lot of things, and I've got a lot of tools in my garage, so I like to have as many as I can. So we applied that same philosophy here to get as many tools in the belts of our consultants as possible to assist with their CPQ implementations. So, drives value, quality, consistency, and, we're going to be coming out with some more information on that soon, but we're really excited about it.
Excellent.
I saw some of it, and there's some stuff that I was like, wow, it was so advanced. I was like, there's a couple things in there. I was like, this is pretty advanced scientific stuff that I was impressed by. So,
Excellent.
yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff in there.
So Stephen, I'm going to ask you one more question. What do you think you'll be doing in 2035, 10 years from now?
Hopefully retired.
Yeah, I don't know. Like maybe, maybe I'm semi-retired at that point in time. But yeah, I think ultimately, as long as I'm, engaged with customers, solving unique challenges, then I'll be a happy camper.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Do you think there's a point of last question? Is there a certain amount of money that you would have that would stop you from doing that? Or you'd be like a retired
$1 trillion.
$1 billion. Would you still do that? Pro bono or?
I don't know if I would do as many hours as I'm doing right now, but I think I would still do a little bit of it. I'd get bored otherwise.
Yeah, I find that people underestimate doing nothing is actually worse than being busy.
Doing nothing is not what I want to be doing. Let me put it that way. Not at all.
Yeah.
Well, this was really good. Honestly, I think we should have you back, Stephen, as the evolution of ServiceNow matures, and you have probably even like a bigger story there, and maybe 6 to 12 months, because we could keep going for like 2 more hours if we wanted to, but I think we all gotta move on, and yeah, just really appreciate everything you did.
Thank you
Yeah.
for this. It's great.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.